Okay, here we are, ready to talk about nationalism. This is the first step in the long line that we've been going forward towards to the new era. This nationalism era of European history is the creation of a unified Italy and a unified Germany. And we've been talking a lot about both over the past couple of months, especially the fact that in Germany, you've got the old era of the Holy Roman Empire that had allow different European nations to have control of the resources and people in what is now Germany. So all of that very wealthy in resources area known as Central Europe. And so the deal is that Germany is already under the influence of Prussia by the time we get to the 1800s. But Prussia hasn't gone further yet until we get to the era of revolutions that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, where we were talking about the lead up towards the revolutions of 1832 and 1848 and the French getting rid of their very last king and having presidents now, that sort of thing. And so Italy and Germany are just at a point where they're ready to get into the game of independence, and they're not going to do it through having liberal congresses or necessarily having conservative monarchies. They're going to be playing a different role by the use of something called nationalism. Nationalism is a cultural identity concept, so I'm just going to read the slide. Nationalism is the belief that one's greatest loyalty should not be to a king or an empire, but to a nation of people who share a common culture and history. That's what nationalism is. If we were talking about fascism, fascism is when you have the belief in a particular king or empire, right? You actually have this diehard loyalty, especially to some kind of party that runs the country, and you will follow them almost as if you were a fanatic of a religion. So that's the difference. So what about Italy? Let's start with them. We have three people to talk about when it comes to Italy. First, let's look at regions. We're going to split this tale up into northern Italy right here, into central Italy right here, and southern Italy right here. What we also need to remember is that this region is governed by a whole bunch of different countries, much like the Holy Roman Empire has been, so has too been Italy. Now, there are some slightly independent regions right here. Turin and Parma and Tuscany have been fairly independent at this point. They're powerful Italian states governed by powerful Italian families. Beyond that, though, Lombardy and Venice are ruled by Austria. They're owned by Austria. The Papal States are governed by France, and the southern boot of Italy and Sicily is governed by Spain. So you're going to see that this region is different from this region and is different from this region because they have developed different identities depending on who was ruling them or not ruling them at the time. Here are three rebels that are going to be hugely influential in the Italians fighting for independence. Mazzini begins the process of nationalism just by starting a fight that's not going to succeed. This is one of those 1832, fights where he rises up at the same time that the French are having their first post-Napoleon revolt. And so that encourages Mazzini to do the same thing. Remember the whole domino theory, where if one major nation has some kind of rebellion or overthrow, other nations might start to have the same thing happen. Well, that era of revolutions between 1832 and 1848 is going to influence Italy quite a lot. And so Mazzini is going to be the beginner of rebellions. Garibaldi is going to be in charge of the South, and Cavour is going to be in charge of freeing the North, or nationalizing, I should say. Well, what's the deal? Mazzini, again, I mentioned that he was the first to start a era of revolts in Italy. He's going to form a nationalist group of people that are calling Italy Young Italy, like it's some kind of new movement, and that's what they call themselves. It's 1832, the same time that France was having their first post-Napoleon revolt as well. Okay, so he wants to get rid of foreign rule. That's, of course, the idea of all of the revolutions, and create a unified Italy. His era is called the Resurgence. Okay, and by 1848, when the French had succeeded in their revolt finally, the rebels here, the young Italy guys here in Italy under Mazzini, have failed. So in 1848, the Austrians, the French, and the Spanish have not yet left. They have not been defeated by Mazzini's forces. Well, how about the other two guys? Let's talk about Cavour. He has such a sly look right here. You notice that? Very sly look. Cavour is what I would consider as a master politician of the ilk of people like Machiavelli. Really good at playing the game of national politics, okay? So Cavour is going to not raise an army. That's not how he's going to free northern Italy. He's going to simply pit big empires against each other and then get rewarded for doing so by getting some land. So what he's going to do that is he's going to pit the French and the Austrians against each other at first. And so the French and the Austrians will fight, and in return, you're going to see Cavour getting some territory, and it's really kind of brilliant. So give me a minute to get to him. I also need to introduce Garibaldi, who is in the south. So he's in the north, he's in the south. Garibaldi is going to be in the later period here, right, 1860. He's going to be the leader of a nationalist armed movement in southern Italy. So unlike Cavour, who's trying to do this through politics, he's going to do it through actual nationalist armies. And so you're going to see volunteers joining a group called the Red Shirts. By Red Shirts, we don't mean Star Trek, if you know what I'm talking about. We're talking about a nationalist group calling themselves the Red Shirts because that's basically the uniform that they're going to have. It's easier to get red shirts than to actually make army uniforms. So that's what he does. So this guy is going to be the great unifier at some point, and he's going to succeed in southern Italy. So what happens? Okay, we're going to start here. There's an agreement in the north between Cavour, right? This guy with the very sly smirk on his face. Cavour is going to create a agreement between the French leader named Napoleon III. Okay, Napoleon III is the president or the premier of France at the time. Napoleon III agrees to help the Italians under Cavour to fight off the Austrians as long as the French get some reward from it. So what Cavour promises the French is, listen, Cavour says, I will be an excuse for France and Austria to fight because the French and the Austrians are already willing to fight over some other issues. And so Cavour says, hey, France, if you want this territory, this resource-rich territory called Savoy, and you would like this resource-rich area called Nice and this port city right here, you can have those. And in return, we want Lombardy. We want you to help us get Lombardy from the Austrians. And so Cavour's right here in this little free territory right here. And so what's going to happen is Napoleon III sends an army in and fights the Austrians right here and kicks the Austrians out of Lombardy. In return, the Austrians have to make a peace deal at this point, and the Austrians give Lombardy to Cavour, to the northern Italians. So now Italy in the north is unified right here and right here. Lombardy and this kind of free region right here, and France gets Savoy and Nice in return. So that's the beginning, right, is Cavour creating a war between France and Austria. And so Lombardy. Well, let's move forward. What happens? This area here, Tuscany and Parma, are going to have a big vote inspired by this event, and they agree to join. They vote to join Cavour's new northern Italy. So now this region, and this region are all part of a northern Italian group, right? A new kind of northern faction that are trying to unify Italy. You'll notice that Venice is right here. Venice is very jealously guarded by the Austrians. At some point, Cavour is going to have to find a way to get Venice from Austria. But Venice is so well fortified and so well occupied and so important to the Austrians because it's a major seaport for them that the Austrians are not going to let it go easy. So it's not going to be some simple, hey, France, we'll give you some more land if you pop in here and fight the Austrians a little bit, right? It's got to be something much bigger. So we'll see what happens there, all right? So anyway, in 1860, there is a vote called a plebiscite, and these guys in the rest of northern Italy join in with Cavour. Okay, so let's talk about southern Italy under Garibaldi. It's 1860, and 1,000 red shirts of this armed militia are going to rise up, led by Garibaldi. They're going to sail from Genoa, and they're going to force the Spanish army out of Sicily. So Garibaldi is going to force the Spanish out of Sicily, and then the end result is that he's going to move up towards Naples, and he's going to kick the Spanish out of all these coastal regions, which is where they were. So Garibaldi takes complete control of southern Italy. The Spanish don't really have the power to do anything about this, which is why it was so easy to beat them. And in the end, you've now got a southern Italy that is under one Italian rule, one Italian guy's rule, that's Garibaldi, and a good portion of northern Italy that's under Cavour, another Italian guy. So what's the next thing that ought to happen? Well, both of these guys, Garibaldi and Cavour, believe in a unified Italy. So they need to find a way to do that. And what they're going to do is they're going to get Victor Emmanuel to agree to become the new king of Italy. The first new king Italy has had really since the Visigoths conquered the Romans. And so Victor Emmanuel II is going to become the first king of Italy in the modern era, and he is going to be the one that is the king of northern, at least northwest, and southern Italy. Turin is going to be made the first capital. It's right here in 1861. And Cavour will pass away, but Cavour has successfully managed to unify northern Italy and brokered a deal with Garibaldi to bring southern Italy in. And now you have a country that is just made up of northern Italy and southern Italy, which means obviously we need to talk about Venice, and we need to talk about the Papal States. The French are here and the Austrians are here. How does that become part of Italy? Well, 1862, Garibaldi sails as the military leader of King Emmanuel, the new king of Italy, goes to Rome to try to fight against the French that control it. He loses. 2 years later, Victor Emmanuel is simply going to meet with the King of France, and he negotiates the withdrawal of French troops. Now, it's not quite that simple, because in 1864, France was at war with Prussia. And because France was at war with Prussia, they really couldn't afford to leave a ton of troops here. So the French needed to leave anyway. It's just that what Victor Emmanuel did was he actually talked to the French to help them decide to leave, knowing that there wasn't going to be a fight or bad blood between Victor Emmanuel's Italy and the French, that sort of thing. And Victor Emmanuel had to agree to allow there to be a pope still in Rome, because some people in Italy wanted to get rid of the papacy entirely. They felt like it was too powerful and a puppet of major empires that had always treated Italy poorly. And so Victor Emmanuel agrees that a pope needs to remain in Italy as the controller of the Catholic Church, of which France, of course, was Catholic, and the French get to withdraw all their troops secure and safe, and knowing that their religion is safe. So that's what happens. The new capital of Italy is going to be Florence, right here. Beautiful city to visit if you ever have the chance. Okay, so that takes us to 1866. In 1866, Italy, and we'll talk more about this later, Italy joins Prussia in a war against Austria. Prussia is going to be at war against the Austrians and the French a few times during their unification period that's going on at the same time that Italy is doing theirs. And so the Prussians will win this war handily against the Austrians. When they do, Italy gets Venice as a reward for joining the Prussians. So Italy is now going to include all of this region, including Venice, and all of this region right here, and all of this region right here, because the French left peacefully. So there you go, right? There is your unified Italy in 1866. One more thing to talk about with this. By 1870, all French troops have left, and Rome is now the new capital of Italy in 1871. And so it is kind of interesting because Pope Pius IX is going to refuse to allow the Vatican to become part of the new nationalized Italy. And that's very normal. It's like that today. The Vatican is separate as a separate state from the rest of the world. But the deal is that the only time that the Vatican is going to be part of Italy is when a new fascist leader eventually comes along, and he forces it to be that way, right? He just says, "Hey, Pope, you're now part of Italy," and the Pope had no way to stop it. So anyway, I want to mention one last thing before we move on to Germany. Venice, the Austrians are really angry about having lost Venice. And so when World War I happens, the Austrians are going to use that war as an excuse to invade Venice. Italy is going to be neutral in World War I, but they're going to lose something like 300,000 people fighting against the Austrians who are trying to get Venice back. The Austrians have long memories, and they remember how the Prussians forced them to give up Venice, and boy, do they want it back. So World War I for the Italians is mostly in the Alps, trying to keep the Austrians out of Venice. Okay, so let's move forward. How about some problems in Italy as a result of unification? These are all the same problems Italy still has, but they're still a country. They're united as a country, so you can give that to them, despite the fact that they have tensions between the agricultural South and the industrialized North, and many different ways of life depending on where in Italy they are, and different versions of Italian that they speak, disorganized political parties just like they are today, and various strikes that happen pretty constantly against many different issues. Regardless of all that, and the fact that Italy is not really a super wealthy country, regardless of all that, Italy has not broken up and has not been conquered by anybody else since Mussolini and Hitler. So the Italians like being a country despite the fact that they have their own problems, right? Okay, nationalism in Germany. Great, powerful picture right here. You've got all these Prussian officers right here, and you've got Bismarck right over here, and you've got, of course, Kaiser Wilhelm right here. No, I'm sorry, Bismarck's right here. I apologize. And so Wilhelm and Bismarck. What is their story? What's going on here? What's the deal? All right, and really, this picture, guys, tells you everything you need to know about Prussia when it comes to how the Prussians saw themselves. Okay, well, let's go here. Back to 1815, Congress of Vienna, and Congress of Vienna tries to reset Europe back towards the way it was before Napoleon. The end result is that it's not going to be entirely set back to the way it was before Napoleon. Prussia is a pretty decent size after Napoleon's gone. Here's Eastern Prussia. Here's a little piece of Prussia right here too. And so Prussia and Prussia, right? This is a pretty decent sized territory in northern Germany. And this territory regularly kicks France's and Austria's butt in any kind of warfare about border control. Regularly. Prussia, industrialized, fanatical, militarists. Is there a revolt in Prussia that happens between 1832 and 1848 like happened in other countries? Yes, but Prussia held it together during that time. So what has Prussia got going for it? It's mostly German, very powerful, one of the most powerful armies in Europe. They have a huge amount of resources to draw from that have to do with iron and copper production that leads to their military. Industrialized faster than other German states, so that makes them the lead industrial nation here in Germany. And super rich resources of the Rhineland, which is going to be part of what helps to fuel the Germans when we go into World War I and II. Okay, 1848, there is going to be, during that era of revolutions, a fight in Prussia. Ultimately, what happens is that the Prussian king, Kaiser Wilhelm, is simply going to allow there to be a constitution and a prime minister. The king is going to give the illusion of sharing power without really doing that. What happens is that there's going to be a type of government that looks a bit like Britain's government, where you've got a parliament with a prime minister, and then you've got a Kaiser or a king. The deal is that the king maintains complete and utter power because that king gets to choose the prime minister in Prussia, and that prime minister is going to be a supporter of the king. So they work in concert. They're not working against each other like they might in Britain. They're working in concert. So the people don't really win out in their revolt. They just get the addition of another branch of government in parliament that makes it look like the people won, which seemed to settle them down pretty well. So you've got the Junker Party, which is a party of people that support the idea of there being a very powerful monarchy, all right, under the control of a constitutional parliament. And that's what you got, right? That's what Prussia's going to become. Strongly conservative and opposed to liberal ideas. They don't want to have a type of democracy. They don't really want that at all. Okay, so what does Kaiser Wilhelm, the king of Prussia, want to do? He wants to increase the size of the military. He has to get Parliament on his side to do that because Parliament, the Prussian one, is modeled after the British one, and the British Parliament is going to control the money. How do you make sure that he gets this one power? Well, he needs to find a prime minister that will support him. That prime minister, ladies and gentlemen, is the famous and infamous Otto von Bismarck. This is maybe the one guy that's responsible for creating Germany. And so Otto von Bismarck, he is of the junker class that supports the idea of the wealthy landowners being in charge of Germany, so doesn't really get into revolutions. Prime minister by 1862, the same time that Italy is finally becoming a unified independent nation. All right. Here's Otto von Bismarck when he was young and took over as prime minister. Here's Otto von Bismarck in his older age with that very famous World War I era Prussian hat with a little spike on it, right? And so what is Bismarck famous for? He's famous for realpolitik, and you'll see this phrase used in political circles a lot. This is the politics of reality, realpolitik, that's all it means. And I've mentioned before that Otto von Bismarck was a Machiavellian. He was all about the reality of how you control people and how you control nations and play nations off of each other for your own political gain. The Iron Chancellor, he's known as being this guy who's very powerful, doesn't really let any weird things happen in his country that is not under his control, very organized, and very, very good at getting people to see his point. His mental point, not necessarily the point on the top of his hat. So let me just show you his first speech, or, a quote from his first speech when he became the prime minister as a younger man. Not by speeches and votes of the majority, like in a democracy, are the great questions of the time decided. That was the error of 1848 and 49, but rather by iron and blood, right? Speaking of realpolitik, this guy understands that if you want to have a safe Prussia that's safe from Austria and France and Russia and anybody else, and you want it unified, it's going to have to be done through the Prussian military. And so that's the deal there. Other quotes: a conquering army on the border will not be stopped by eloquence, basically by diplomacy. Politics is not an exact science. I like that. And politics is the art of the possible, what you can make happen. So let's talk about what happens soon after Otto von Bismarck becomes the prime minister. And Kaiser Wilhelm is happily saying, make us a unified Germany. Well, it's 1866. There's going to be this thing called the 7 Weeks' War. Sorry about the grammar there. Bismarck is going to, on purpose, create a war with Austria. Remember, this is the same time that the Italians will actually get involved on Bismarck's side so that they can get some aid and get some Austrian territory, like Venice. So what happens is Bismarck has already made a deal with the French and the Russians. And Bismarck has said, listen, I need to fight the Austrians. I need you guys not to get involved as allies of the Austrians. Is that cool? Because sometimes when one European nation starts to rattle their sabers, so to speak, gets ready to fight a war, the other nations get nervous that war might extend into their countries. And so Otto von Bismarck is going to tell France and Russia not to worry. This is just a little fight between Prussia and Austria, and only Prussia and Austria. And France and Russia trust him, and Otto von Bismarck has not proven himself to be an untrustworthy person, and he's not going to do so this time. So what happens is Otto von Bismarck also makes a deal with Italy because the Italians are trying to unify themselves by kicking the other Europeans out. And so Prussia and Italy together are going to fight Austria. France and Russia are neutral and stay out of it, thanks to the earlier agreement between Bismarck and those guys. And what's going to happen is that Bismarck is going to do something twice. He does this against Austria, and Bismarck does this against France. So this is one of my favorite weird strategies I've ever seen to actually make a war happen. So you guys know how President Trump is kind of famous for his his tweets that tend to get people angry a lot of times, right? And those tweets sometimes anger other countries, and you kind of see diplomatic issues happening, and then suddenly the White House staff has to get involved and try to smooth all that over because Trump just kind of speaks his mind whenever he wants to at like 3 a.m. in the morning. Well, the deal is that Otto von Bismarck did the same thing. It's just that he did it on purpose, specifically to get a certain reaction out of people that he wanted to get. And so what Otto von Bismarck does is he publishes in the Prussian newspapers, which are going to be shared in Austria and in France and everywhere else. Otto von Bismarck is going to publish a bunch of anti-Austrian newspaper stories. He's going to be basically saying a lot of radical, mean things about Austria in the Prussian newspapers. Austria is going to be insulted, and eventually Austria, to protect their honor, is going to duel Prussia. And so they declare war on Prussia in 1866 to satisfy their honor, because Otto von Bismarck has been basically calling them a bunch of girly cowards. So there's a war in which, of course, Otto von Bismarck is completely prepared for. The Prussians are going to fight and win against Austria. And as a result, the Austrians lose Venice, which is given to Italy. And now Prussia and Italy are really good buddies, right? And Prussia gets some territory from this, by the way. It's not just to help the Italians. Okay, so now Prussia is in control of more territory over here, all right, because they got it from the Austrians, which are right down here. And so what Prussia wants to do is they are also going to want to get some territory right here, Alsace-Lorraine territory. This is a very resource-rich territory, and the Prussians need this if they're going to try to convince all these guys to get involved. Keep in mind that Otto von Bismarck wants to get the British out of Hanover, and he wants to get the French and the Austrians out of southern Germany. To do that, he needs to convince all the people that live here and here and here that the Prussians are going to protect them, that the Prussians will keep them safe, that by joining the Prussians and forming a new German nation, that they're not all going to be like, you know, invaded and treated like a bunch of rebels and killed by angry Austrians and French. And so what Otto von Bismarck does is he needs to pick a fight with the French so that he can get some territory here, and then basically show these guys in Bavaria and these guys over here that in Bohemia that they can trust the Prussians. And so that's what happens. It's 1867, and you're going to see, moving forward, it starts here, where Otto von Bismarck is going to do the same thing that he did to the Austrians. He's going to be doing that to the French. What am I saying? He starts to put into the Prussian newspapers a bunch of articles about how he thinks the French are weak. And while he's doing that and insulting Napoleon III and basically making fun of French culture, he's getting the French more and more angry. And so finally, between 1870 and 71, the French are going to declare war on Prussia just the way the Austrians did. They were goaded into a fight for their honor. And the fighting happens right here, where a good portion of the trenches are for World War I. It's the same region. And so right here, Alsace-Lorraine, this whole area, you're going to have this huge fight between the very professional and modern Prussian army going up against the French army, which is not quite so well set. And the end result is that Napoleon III, the king, not the king, the premier of France, is going to be in deep trouble. So Kaiser Wilhelm gets in on it, along with his prime minister, Otto von Bismarck, and they're going to be insulting the French publicly and in telegrams, which results in the French declaring war. This is brilliant stuff. This is statescraft and real politics. It's playing nations and their internal system of pride off each other. It's well done stuff. It's very, again, Machiavellian. So there's a 4-month fight where basically Napoleon III is in France, surrounded by a Prussian army that's in this fortified town. And eventually Napoleon III has to surrender. And in return, for his freedom, Napoleon III has to give the Alsace-Lorraine territory to Prussia. So this is it. The Franco-Prussian War is it. Once the Prussians have showed all Germans that they can beat the French and can beat the Austrians, all the other German culture people joined in, and Prussia becomes Germany under Prussian leaders. Again, when we get to World War One and Two, the military leadership of the German army, not the Nazi army, but the German army, is going to be Prussian. All right, these guys are the ones that are in charge of the German military both times, because this is what they do. Okay, so this is all going to be part of Germany now, this whole thing right here. Now, the Russians, of course, are going to be a little bit nervous about this. It was part of Poland right here. And the Belgians and the Netherlandese and the French are all a bit nervous, because who knows that the Prussians are going to go any further. And as you know, the Prussians are not going to go any further yet. Eventually, they will. That's going to be when Germany gets into 1914 and World War I starts, and Germany under Prussian leadership is going to keep doing what they were doing before, which is to try to expand their borders. Where do they want to go? The Netherlands, Belgium, France, Hungary, right, or Austria, and into Poland. That's where these guys are always going to want to expand it into. Okay, so let's get to just the end of this story, the end of this PowerPoint. 1871, January 18th, Wilhelm, the Kaiser, is now going to be the actual emperor of a unified Germany. And they're going to call this the Second Reich. Just, Reich is basically a term that speaks about the era of time, the new kingdom, the new era. So there you go. There's a German empire and there's a unified Italy. That leads us into the modern era. Austria, Russia, France, and Italy, Germany, and Great Britain. Who are the most powerful empires now in Europe? Germany and Great Britain, and the other guys are all over here. So the balance of power has shifted with Germany coming together to be about as powerful as the British Empire, because the British had to go to their empire, their colonies, to get the same kind of resources that Germany is now getting just from all of Central Europe, because of how resource rich it is. Two very powerful nations. Okay, now we're done. Thanks a lot.